Thank you for blowing in this morning. How about this Missouri weather? It was like 25 degrees earlier in the week in the morning, and today it's going to be in the 80s. Crazy. If you don't like it, just wait. Give it a moment. It's Missouri. It'll change. Last week we ended on a bit of a cliffhanger because we were talking about burnout and then came to that powerful passage where Jesus says, "Come to me, all you who are heavily burdened. Take my yoke." And that's such a clash, such a contrast, because you think to yourself, when you're feeling burdened, exhausted, burned out, how does taking a yoke upon you provide anything but greater pain and no gain? Max Lucado has a new book out. Help Is Here is the title of it. And Max, I don't know if any of you are fans of Max Lucado. He writes well, and he tells good stories. And he opens with an illustration that I thought was so powerful. And he tells it as if it's happening to you. So put your mind in that. It's fall. It's a beautiful fall like this one. And you find a deal to a resort hotel in the Rocky Mountains. And the price is right, and you have the time to go. And you are going off to a resort in the mountains. Does that sound good to anyone? Yeah, some of you are ready to go tomorrow, today. You arrive there, he suggests, and you resolve that you're going to get back into hiking or start hiking, but you're going to go hiking in the mountains. And you're excited, you're juiced, and it's the first day of your real vacation. You get up early and you hit the trails, but you're not well prepared. Your shoes crimp because you really haven't broken in your hiking boots. You forget to take the water, which becomes a real problem when it's this dry in Colorado. And you end up on the wrong trail, which is far more difficult than you ever imagined. And compounding the problem, as you climb up toward the summit of the trail, you arrive, and there's a group of people having a great time. They're enjoying a catered lunch. And you tend not to be a jealous, envious person, but in that moment, you weren't feeling great about the circumstances of life. The next day you decide to do better. So you take the water, you bend the shoes, and you hit the trails, but it's even drier and dustier and more difficult. And you're on the trail, and the group of people, the partiers, pass you by, having the time of their lives. And you're almost seething because this isn't at all what you anticipated. And then the third day, you're almost ready to give up and go home because it's been so bad. You go down for coffee in the lobby and you hear someone calling your name. Yes, your name. They call you out and they say, "Oh, I've been looking for you. I'm the recreational director here at the resort." And I don't know if you ever even realized, but included in your cost is a daily guided hiking experience. And we carry your water and we deliver lunch, and people have so much fun, and they make new friends, and you've been missing out. And I want to invite you to come with us. Today is part of the luncheon. We're going to have homemade ice cream. How do you feel at this moment? You've missed out on it for whatever the reason, and it's been miserable. And now you've been invited for something radically different. Look around you. Look at our culture today. It's not only a mess, there's a stench. There really is. It's the stench of animosity and anger and evil and hostility. And people feel burnt out. They feel like they're on the trails and their hiking boots hurt. And they're thirsty and they don't have the water. And they see other people having fun and they want it more than anything. And there's a palpable sense of desperation. And Jesus said, "Come to me, all you who are heavily laden." What does he mean? And what can that mean for you very specifically in this age of burnout? And as promised, I ended last week telling you I want to tell you the truth on this. And today that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to go back to that passage of Scripture, the one from Matthew 11:28, and we're just going to dig down into this. But first, just listen. "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Now stop. You just heard me read that. I want to hopefully take your mind to a different place. Forget that there's anyone else around you. In this moment, imagine it's just you and Jesus. And you're keenly aware of the burdens that have just weighed you down. And they are myriad. You're keenly aware of the pain and sorrow that you've experienced recently and before. And you're feeling exhausted, but you can't sleep. You're frazzled. You're tired. You're hungry and thirsty, and just a little hangry. Now just pause and try not to hear my voice. Try to hear the ancient words that Jesus spoke 2,000 years ago, as if spoken directly to you. "Come to me, you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your soul. For my yoke is easy, my burden is light." Now, what did you hear? And how do you understand? Because this really gets to the crux of our faith. And this is the essential truth when you're struggling with the burnout that is so prevalent in our culture today. Let's just unpack what Jesus said together. He said to me, "Come to me." He offers an invitation. You get invitations, don't you? Wow, there are like 4 of you here. You get invitations, don't you? Invitations are so fascinating because they're really tied to your age and station in life. When you're a little kid, remember somebody would knock on the door and say, "Hey, can you come out and play?" That was an invitation, right? And when you were in like junior high and you said to someone, "Hey, would you like to go to the dance?" That was an invitation. They may not have accepted that invitation, but you know it was an invitation. And then of course, if you went off to college, for instance, you got a lot of invitations, right? You know, and your parents were just a wee bit frustrated by that because most of the invitations were not to study groups. Would that be true? And then of course, you finish up high school or college or graduate school, and you're in that young adult age, and you're getting invitations to weddings. You know what I'm saying? You've experienced that? I mean, look out, because like in April, they start hitting for May and June, and you can go to a wedding just about every weekend, which sounds like fun until you're doing it every weekend, and it's expensive because they expect you to bring a gift. Have you noticed? And then they feed you rubber chicken, invitations, and then perhaps you get married and have kids, and then the invitations take a totally different tenor. There's invitations to playgroup, and then there's invitations to T-ball, and then there's invitations to every dance and music recital imaginable, and every Christmas program at school and everywhere else, and all of a sudden, there's soccer every weekend, and football and baseball, and there are sports you haven't even heard of that your kids want to participate in. And then your kids grow up and you think you have it easy, and then you're blessed with grandchildren. And you go to even more sports stuff than you ever did when you were young. Now let's be honest with God and ourselves and admit that there's a danger to the invitations that are being extended to us today. You're invited to extremism. And I don't care which end of the pole you're talking about, there is an extremism that is punctuated with hatred and animosity. And from my perspective, the Antifa people, the antagonistic to any form of government, are very different from the people on the far extreme right. And they're all angry, and they're all spinning theories, but worse than that, they're all targeting someone as the enemy. That's an invitation that we see all the time. They're invitations to various pursuits that really don't give you life, they take life from you. And it's in social media. Every time you turn on the computer, there is various temptations and invitations. And through it all, there's this stench. I still remember. It was my first church. I was an associate pastor. You'd walk into the office complex, and there was the receptionist / secretary / assistant, whatever you want to call her. Her name was Joyce, and she was delightful. She sat right there. And then there were two offices. There was the office for the senior pastor, and there was the office for the associate pastor. Senior pastor's office was big. The associate pastor's office, not so much. Do you have a mental image? I remember Monday morning showing up for work, and I swung open the door to my office, and there was this sicky, sweet stench in the room, and it's kind of like, it rocked me back on my heels. This is my office. What's going on? And I found the maintenance / janitor guy. He was a great guy. He really was. He was slow of speech, but not of mind. He was actually pretty witty. And I went and found him, and he's standing outside my office with me, and he goes, "Yeah, that would be a dead mouse." And I go, "What?" He said, "Yeah, I think it's in the heating right there by your desk." And I go, "Really?" And he goes, "Yep." And I said, "How do you get rid of it?" He looked at me and shrugged and smiled and says, "I don't know. But what I did is I put that there air freshener right on top of the heater. That ought to help, don't you think?" Oh, it's funny now, not then. And it's not funny now at all in terms of the stench that wafts through our culture. Because I look at the hatred, the prejudice, the animosity, and it is an unholy odor, and no one seems to know how to get rid of it. What you need to understand was Jesus said, "Come to me." He was saying, turn away from all of that. Because if you choose to follow Jesus, it means you're going in this direction, not that or that or that or that. And there are so many paths that lead to misery. And Jesus says instead, "Come to me, because I am the only one who offers hope to the hopeless, help to the helpless, power to the powerless." Because when you choose to follow Jesus, it puts you on a different path in life. And that's why Jesus said, "Take my yoke." Take my yoke. Now, let me explain this, because we don't think of yokes because we're no longer an agrarian society. In fact, we hardly ever even see yokes. We don't see working animals that often. Oh, by the way, how many of you like to watch the Super Bowl? Super Bowl. Really? Is it the game, or is it dependent on who's playing? Yes! Because frankly, I got to tell you, some of the teams who are in the Super Bowl, I could care less. Couldn't you? But I love the ads. Now, I need to tell you, I don't drink Budweiser. I don't even like Budweiser. And I don't really know why other people drink Budweiser. But I love the Clydesdales. Oh. My son and I went to the farm and looked at them, and it's just spectacular. And the young ones, these are magnificent creatures. They really are incredible. And I did a little research, and this is so fascinating. A Clydesdale by itself can pull 7,000 pounds. Ooh, isn't that amazing? But if you yoke a Clydesdale to another Clydesdale, they can actually together pull 18,000 pounds. Unless they're trained by the professionals who work for Budweiser. Because then 2 Clydesdales trained together can pull more than 25,000 pounds. Does that just blow your mind? More than 12 tons. I think about that. Who's doing the lifting? When I think about being yoked to Jesus, it means several specific things. When you're yoked to Jesus, it means you're following the path that Jesus is leading us on. But even more importantly than that, when you're yoked to Jesus, the Bible tells us that we're not the ones doing the heavy lifting. He is. Paul, the brilliant apostle Paul, in his letters over and over and over again, in one way or another, always says the same things. It's in our weakness that God's power is revealed. I think we live with half faith. We live as functional atheists. We don't want to actually venture and dare to step out on anything we cannot do by ourselves. And that limits us severely, because it's only when we admit, hey, we can't do it alone, Lord, and we're yoked to Jesus, that He steps in and does the heavy lifting. And in the course of my life and ministry, over and over and over again, what has been revealed is that my weakness only shifts the focus to God's power. And miracles, true miracles happen. Amazing things happen because we are yoked to the Lord. And where does that lead us? To such a point of peace and serenity, where we know we can trust His leadership and guidance. And we know that He will lift us up and carry the load, that we can actually release it to Jesus. Because Jesus is the one who said, you will find rest for your soul. What does that look like? What does that feel like? As you are aware, our son and daughter-in-law blessed us with a grandson. His name is Jackson James. And being a grandpa is so much more fun than being a father. It's just incredible because you have the time and you realize how precious it is. We say to Stephen and Angelina at least once, a couple times a week, come on over, bring Jackson, leave him so you guys can run errands or do whatever you need to do or have a little time. Jackson has colic. He's a colicky baby, you know? And so he fusses a lot. And they brought Jackson over and they dropped him off. And almost immediately it was fussy. So Mary Ann, my wife, gave him a bottle. And that seemed to settle him for a little bit. And then he was just fussy, even worse. And she's walking around, she's patting him. And you can just tell he's so miserable, so unhappy. And I said to my wife, give him to me. Yeah, she gave me that same kind of skeptical look you're giving me. Like, what are you thinking? Seriously? Give him to you? And I said, yeah, give him to me. So I walked him just a little bit, and then I sat down on the rocker. And I held him close, so his head was just like in the picture against my chest. And I actually sang to him. Now, I can't carry a tune, but he didn't mind at all. Because I sang, and God will lift you up on eagle's wings. and bear you on the breath of dawn. This is the song I sang to my children when they were infants in my arm. And the fussing stopped. And his eyes were open, but then you could see he was fighting to keep them open. And he just closed his eyes and snuggled into my chest. And he slept for almost an hour and 45 minutes, exactly in this position. And it was so restful. It was so peaceful. It was so beautiful. How many of you like to sleep? Oh, come on. Yeah. After a long, great day, don't you like to slip between the cool sheets and snuggle in and just go to sleep? Isn't that a wonderful feeling? Except when you can't. And then it's one of the most miserable things to lay in bed and toss and turn and not be able to sleep. I experienced that, especially at the beginning of the pandemic, because I didn't know what was going to happen. The first time in all my years of ministry, the doors of the church were closed and shut down, and I didn't know what was going to happen. And I must confess, there was a measure of worry and panic that crept into my heart, which is the antithesis of trust and faith. And so finally, one sleepless night, I just prayed to God and said, God, I have no idea what's going to happen, but you do. And I trust you, and I love you. And I'm relying on your love and entrusting all of this, the people and church I love, to you. And I slept, just like Jackson. Because here's what I'm convinced of. I think in that moment, Jackson could hear the resonance of my voice when I was singing, and more importantly, he could hear the heartbeat, my heartbeat, in his life. And when you follow Jesus, when you yoke yourself to the Lord, the closer you come in approximation to the Lord, the less distracted you are by all the things in the world, the more closely yoked you are. You can hear the heartbeat of God. And you can hear the resonance of his voice speaking to you and saying, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. This is the very heart of our faith. My favorite football coach of all time, Vince Lombardi. Yeah. Former Catholic high school coach who took over the helm of the Green Bay Packers when they had 15 consecutive losing seasons. What a job offer that was, right? He took them to back-to-back world championships. After one brutal loss, he went to the locker room to meet with his players. And he said, gentlemen, we're getting back to fundamentals. And he held out a football and said, this is a football. And one of the witty players raised his hand and said, Coach, could you take it a little slower? Let's get back to fundamentals. Let's just look at the takeaways here. Because if we're going to beat burnout, it really requires three things. The acceptance of the invitation from Jesus to follow him and to find life. To choose to yoke your life to Jesus so that he can do the heavy lifting and he can provide the direction, the path, the purpose. Because then and only then will we find the peace that only he can offer. Now, through this entire series, which concludes next week, we've been talking about the theological foundation. And next week, Pastor Ryan is going to bring it all to a beautiful, gorgeous culmination and talk about the practical aspects of being a follower of Jesus who finds life in Christ, even in a world of burnout.